I know why God had you sing that first song. It was for me. That's one of my favorite songs that you guys do, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you listening. Two scriptures that I want to share with you. 1 John chapter 3 and John chapter 11. 1 John and then John's gospel account, John chapter 11, 1 John chapter 3. I've thought many times during this week what and how I would share with you today, and knew that I couldn't do but share some of the things that have happened this week and the ways that God has spoken and moved. And this morning, I had actually a different scripture that I was going with, and God reminded me of these words, and I thought, how perfect, especially for this day, how perfect. 1 John chapter 3, beginning in verse number 1. How great is the love that the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called the children of God. And that is what we are. How great is the love that the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called the children of God. And that is what we are. And then in John chapter 11, a very appropriate passage for today. It's the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. My dad's pastor has been calling him Lazarus all week, and so have others. You know the story. If you don't know it, or if you haven't read it in a long time, I would encourage you to go back sometime today or tomorrow and read the 11th chapter of John. It's a tremendous story, but I just want just a couple of verses here, beginning in verse number 21. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha answered, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die." And I love how Jesus ended that with this question: do you believe this? Last Sunday morning at 7:30, I was here in the office and preparing for the day, and Sue called me. She was at home. Margaret's son-in-law, Clint, called and told Sue that our dad had just had a heart attack, very massive heart attack, and that the paramedics were with him at that point. And so I immediately told Sue, "I'll be there as quick as I can and we'll go." I ran home and got Sue, and we came here and got Brandon and Ashley, and Randy came by that time, and we got in our van and headed toward Clovis. We got to just past Lemoyne and Opal's place, not very far past there, and my older brother Ron called, and he told us that our dad had died. I did not know all the details at that point, but since have learned some incredible things. Basically, he told us that Dad was on life support and that they had agreed, Margaret and Ron had both agreed, that Dad did not want to be kept alive by artificial means, and they had told the doctor that to take him off life support, which was our wish as well, Randy's and my wish as well. At that point, we pulled over, and I called Shannon. We had called her already and let her know, and we called her and told her that my dad had died, her grandfather had died. We turned around and brought Randy back here because he wanted to get Patty and their family, and we headed on to Clovis, preparing for what we thought was going to be a funeral. Between here and Roswell, all of the things that go through your mind at something like this, I think most of you know my dad. My dad is my hero, has been for all my life that I remember. I'm very close to my dad, and there were many times between here and Clovis that I thought, wow, what I wouldn't give to hear him say I love you, what I wouldn't give to feel his arms hug me and envelop me, and didn't think that that was possible. When we got to Roswell, in fact, we had just pulled up to that stop sign at the bypass that goes around, and my phone rang, and it was my brother Ron. And he said, Dad is still breathing. Where are you? Can you get here quickly? And I said, well, as quickly as we can. I went a little faster than the speed limit, and that's all I'm going to say and admit to. About the time we got to Portales, I called my brother and asked him if Dad was still alive, if Dad was still breathing, and he assured me that he was, but he said he's just really gotten bad. We don't expect him to live. The doctors have said probably just a few more minutes. So between Portales and Clovis Hospital, I don't know how many minutes it was, but it wasn't very many. You see, my older brother's a captain in the police department in Clovis, and I figured I had the best excuse in the world if I got pulled over. We made it to the hospital. In fact, we just parked right at the ambulance entrance, and Clit came out to park our car, and we rushed in. Of course, my dad was still breathing at that point. His breathing was extremely labored. There were family members and friends all around in that emergency room, and we had the opportunity through tears and a lot of weeping to express our goodbyes and our love for him. Obviously, he couldn't hear us. He didn't, or at least we don't know if he could hear us. And while we were there and going through all of the emotion of that, one of the nurses came in, and man, I tell you, the staff at the hospital was incredible. But one of the nurses came in and said, we're going to move your dad to a room so that you guys can be with him and you can spend the time with him that you need to spend. And they did. It took a few minutes, and after a few minutes, we went to the room. And over the next several hours, I couldn't even count the people who came. 4 or 5 times the nursing staff gently tried to get people out of the hallway. They gave us another hospital room and just set chairs in it. I would imagine there were 60 or 70 or 80, 90, 100 people that kept coming by, and many of them stayed for most of the afternoon. Somewhere in the early afternoon, and I shared a little of this through emails, somewhere in the early afternoon, you know how much my dad loves music and how much he loves singing, and that's what we grew up with. And it was just basically the family in the room. There were about a dozen of us in there, and we closed the door to the room. His breathing was very shallow, and we felt like that probably he wouldn't last very long, and we just started singing. We know how much he loves music, and we just started singing. And we sang for, 20 or 30 minutes. The door closed, and after a while, somebody happened to open the door. I don't know if somebody came in or somebody went out, but we looked, and there were people all around the door. And they just said, man, we heard the music, and we just wanted to listen. And it was sweet. It was beautiful. Man, the God's Spirit just came in such an awesome and beautiful way. I found out later that the nurses had gone to the other rooms to ask them if they wanted them to close their doors so they wouldn't be bothered by the noise. And almost everybody said, no, please leave the doors open. They wanted to hear the music and be a part of it. It reminded me of how special the presence of God is and how awesome God's Spirit is. When the paramedics came to the house last Sunday morning, there was no heartbeat, there was nothing, no sign of life at all. Because my brother is a captain in the police department, we had the opportunity to see the paramedics' report. He got a copy of it. And Thursday in Lubbock, he brought it up and we got to read it. And at the top of the report, it says that when they got there, they found that George Hutchison was dead. I think it uses the word dead or deceased there. There was no heartbeat. There was no sign of life at all. They quickly began to work on him. They shocked him with the pads there that they use. His heart started beating, but he was not breathing. They intubated him, put the tube down his throat and into his lungs, and had the bag over him, and they were breathing for him. When he got to the hospital, same thing. And the doctor came to Ron and to Margaret and told them that, the only way he was going to stay alive is if they kept him on life support. And that's when they told him at that time that they did not want to do that. It's interesting because Ron told me that just about 3 weeks before this, 3 weeks ago, he and my dad had a conversation about this specific thing. And my dad said, I don't want to be kept alive artificially. It was an easy decision.